He's a progressive rock club DJ.
The next thing I know, something is being rammed into my chest.
Pink to the middle pocket. That was a hell of a shot.
They had lost their soul.
Yeah. A young ginger-haired man in Essex who finds out that this is his game.
The winning prize for Higgins was £480.
One April Sunday night in 1985, over 18 million people stayed up past midnight to watch on television two men in bow ties try to pot a snooker ball in a theatre in Sheffield. The finish of the 1985 World Snooker Championship is one of the most famous events in UK sporting history. It had it all. A winning machine who was respected but not particularly loved, a jovial Irishman who had upside-down glasses, an astonishing comeback, several near misses, and a finish that has resonated down the ages. This is Sport is History, how it all played out. Hello, I'm Mark Pougatch. Marcus Buckland is with me. We're going back to our childhood. You can tell it's our childhood because they're plugging cigarettes all the time. That's two embassies already, isn't it?
Oh dear, very tempting as well back then.
Yeah, I remember going. I know we're going way off here. Early in my career, going to the Benson and Hedges cricket matches, and along with our lunch, we would get a packet of 20. Oh, yeah.
You're kidding?
No. So you go, a ham salad, and a Benson and Hedges. It's amazing how cigarettes used to rule.
But of course, in those days, the John Player
John Player League,
every Sunday.
Formula One cars.
Formula One was nothing but a cigarette machine.
And darts. Embassy sponsored the darts as well.
There you go.
It was everything. So April 1985, I know where I was. What were you doing?
Do you know, and this is an eternal source of frustration. I was on a gap year in Barcelona. Attempting.
When you go and see Steve Archibald, Marcus is obsessed with Steve Archibald.
Yes, the former Spurs and Aberdeen striker, and indeed he was playing for Barcelona at this time.
Yeah.
Terry Venables, El Tel, was the manager, and they were en route to winning the Spanish title for the first time in 11 years. Yeah. Steve Archibald, thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about the great man. Hopefully we'll dedicate a whole show to him one day. But he had replaced Diego Maradona at the start of that season, and became leading scorer for Barca that year, the second leading scorer in La Liga behind, I think it was Hugo Sanchez of Real Madrid. So I was spending my time teaching a little bit of English, explaining to the kids why Steve Archibald was so good. And on that night in question, though, trying to find a bar in Barcelona that might show the snooker.
Yeah, that wouldn't have happened in the 80s. Well, you'd be all right tonight. You go to an Irish pub nowadays.
Yeah, but on that, I could not find anywhere to watch it.
Oh, well, I was at boarding school, as you had been, so you will understand this, that in our boarding house, we were allowed to watch television for two reasons. One, to watch Minder.
Oh.
They obviously thought.
Now we're talking.
They obviously thought we were being educated to be second-hand car salesmen and very bad private investigators. And the other thing was to watch sport. Yeah. So we were allowed to watch sport. So there was no chance of anybody getting anybody off to bed past midnight while this was going on. Because it's always worth reminding you, as I do my children today, 4 TV channels, only 4, meant that if you were on them regularly, and if you were a high-class sportsman or woman, you were on regularly, you were a massive figure. And that's the huge difference to today, where you'd still be a massive figure. I promise I won't go to one of my high horses. But you're a massive figure if you're a footballer. But if you're a big sportsman or woman today and your sport is only on pay TV, you can walk down Oxford Street and no one knows who you are. In 1981, I always say that Ian Botham was as famous as Kevin Keegan. There is no way that Joe Root is as famous as Harry Kane. But in the mid-'80s, snooker was a big thing. It was a massive thing. And one of the reasons it was such a big thing, apart from being on television all the time, is that football was in the doldrums. It really was. The stadia were crumbling. Attendances were down. You and I were talking about it. We'd go to football 83, 84, 85, White Hart Lane, Highbury. There'd be 20,000 people there. Yeah. Liverpool were a brilliant team. And there was hooliganism. There's no point getting away from it. And within a month of the Black Ball final finishing, we'd had 2 massive tragedies of Bradford and Heysel. So football was the sort of game that your mothers would look at us and go, do you really want to go to that?
Oh, yeah. I remember them saying that every week. Why on earth do you want to go up to Tottenham of all places? Yeah. And I feel a degree of disloyalty about this because my age dictates this. for me, the early 80s as a football fan were the most exciting. I fully see what you're saying. Dominic Sandbrook has done a brilliant piece of analysis on how football in the 80s was a mess. Basically, you had the crumbling stadia, you had all the hooliganism, etc., etc. And it's one of the reasons, as we'll discuss in a moment, why snooker became so popular. For me, though, I just loved it. I loved the raw nature of football, the fact that you could buy a ticket on the gate. But looking back at the attendances and all the rest of it, and that underlying fear, I'll never forget.
Oh, there was a proper underlying latent fear.
I will never forget somebody having a golf ball thrown into his eye from about 10 feet away outside the visiting supporters end at Tottenham in the early 80s. It wasn't pleasant. There's no doubt about that. But it was good news for snooker. What interested me a bit, actually, listening to Dominic Sandbrook when he was talking about this, I mean, he says that from the 50s through to the 80s, football attendances fell by half. Now, obviously, back in the 50s, there were very few other attractions. And you look at county cricket, for example, they'd sell out for a match between Surrey and Essex. But over that period of time, people didn't go out in groups as much. There were other things to do. The ground was fertile for another sport to come through. And snooker obviously ticked a lot of boxes.
Well, and some people know this, but a lot of people still won't. One of the major players behind snooker on television was David Attenborough. David Attenborough had started his career with what we know him to be today, which is, the most extraordinary explorer. And I don't quite know how you describe. Well, he's a nationalite. He's the most famous Briton alive. That's what he is. But there was a period in his time when he became a BBC executive. And he became controller of BBC Two as it pretty much started. And either he or his executive team, when they are effectively trialing colour television in 1967, go, well, wouldn't snooker be a great game to put on TV to trial new colour television? So they came up, I think it was Ted Lowe, wasn't it, who came up with Pot Black in 1969.
Yes, whispering Ted Lowe. I shouldn't do that, should I? But no, he was the inspiration. He set up Pot Black, which ran for a long time. It was just one frame, and it would be the top players of the day who would be playing in front of a very enthusiastic audience. And he also said, dress smartly, put on your dinner jackets, your waistcoats, whatever, to give this sense of elegance.
Yes, a sense of elegance, again, which I don't think they did it deliberately, but increasingly come the 80s compared to the rough and tough tumble of what was going on in football. Put on your bow ties, your big shirts, these things we wear to fancy dress shirts with the big ruffs, that comes out there. And of course, well, there was colour telly, but plenty of people still had black and white TVs. So it did lend itself to Ted Lowe going, for those in black and white, the pink is behind the yellow. But even though it's popular, the World Championship is still the most spit and saw. I mean, I didn't actually realise this. No. I don't think you did until we looked at it. It is still the most spit and sawdust event.
I mean, this is incredible. As you rightly say, so the BBC are looking to trial snooker. Of course, it makes sense in the late 60s. Yeah. And Pot Black comes along in 1969. But if you just look at the 1972 World Championships, which are won by Alex Higgins, the venue is the British Legion Club in Birmingham. The winning prize for Higgins was £480. And I think a vast majority...
Alex Higgins won, didn't he? Yes.
He won it with £480, and the vast majority of spectators in 72 were watching on upturned beer crates. But there was an obvious attraction, and the speed with which those involved take up the mantle is quite extraordinary. Mike Waterson is another name that we must mention. He was a promoter. He saw the possibilities. And in the mid-70s, he decided to hire the Crucible Theatre. He said, we've got to have a better venue. He does a deal with the aforementioned embassy to get a good sponsor on board. He installs some new lights, because the lights they were using in, for example, the British Legion Club in Birmingham would have been so hot and rough and ready that it would have been impossible to play under them for hours and hours at the Crucible. So they've got new lights. But most important of all, the BBC, having done all its trials, having light Pot Black, decides in 1978 to host the event, and almost overnight they get fantastic figures.
It was interesting because you had quite a few players who had come through in the Pot Black era, who then obviously inspired the people we're going to talk about, like Steve Davis and Dennis Taylor and Tony Knowles and all that. But just going back to the first group of characters, I think Ray Reardon's probably the best known, isn't he?
Ray Reardon, who, for a youngster of a certain age, such as I was, he was fascinating. He's Dracula. Yeah. Look at him. He's terrifying. I would not like to get on the wrong side of Ray Reardon, but there was something captivating about the man.
Slick back hair.
Really interesting backstory as well. He was initially a miner. He nearly got killed, actually, and his family said, you need to move on. He became a policeman, and he was a very brave policeman who once wrestled a shotgun out of the arms of a villain and jumped through a skywalk on one occasion to dismantle the threat of another burglar. So this guy had seen it all and was a leading light. I think, funnily enough, he was one of those, Mark, though, as the sport mushroomed, who almost didn't like what was happening because he kind of felt as though they had lost their soul to a degree.
So it's him, Eddie Charlton, the Australian, was in. I mean, Joe Davis was the most famous one, but that's going back another entire generation as well. Eddie Charlton was an Australian. John Spencer, wasn't he? He was not the little Chelsea striker. He was the world champion. And because it was on television all the time, they just start to spawn another generation who find out that they're actually very good at that, particularly a young ginger-haired man in Essex who finds out that this is his game.
Yes, the nugget. Just before we go into Steve Davis, Eddie Charlton, by the way, looked to me as though he was always chewing on a wasp. And I remember my mum was fascinated every time it cut to Eddie Charlton. Who is that? Who is that fellow? Because he looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. But there were some great characters. And you mentioned John Spencer, and I'm going to ask you in a moment. But my favourite player of that era, I'm still not quite sure why, was John Spencer.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, and he was a 3-time world champion. Yeah. He was the first man to win the world championship at the Crucible in 1977. It wasn't fully televised that year. For some reason, I've had it in all sports, I tend to choose different heroes. You've mentioned Steve Archibald, Alan Butcher. Some of you may recall, opening batsman for Surrey in England, played scandalously, only played one test match for England and won one-day international. I always seem to turn to people who are not in everybody's
I like that. No, I like that a little bit. He was being contrary.
I thought he was very smart, very elegant. He hit the ball very hard.
Yes.
Sadly, he had suffered with health problems later on in life. But John Spencer was my favourite. I suspect because of your Essex connections, Steve Davis might have been yours?
We'll get onto it later, but I did interview Steve Davis right at the start of my career, and he was absolutely charming. And I always felt a bit sorry for him because he was so good. And he suffered from the classic British, he's really good, and he's really robotic, and he's really boring. Ergo, we don't want him to win. Although I was never going to do anything, I always quite liked his world partner, Tony Meo. Tony Meo, a little left-hander.
The cat.
Because I thought he was quite clever because for a few years there was a world doubles championship and Steve Davis would always win it with Tony Meo. And I thought that's really smart of you, Tony. Obviously they were in the Barry Hearn stable. I thought that's very smart of you because you can always call yourself a world champion. With respectfully, you were never going to be world individual champion, but that doesn't matter when it comes to booking corporates out, does it? You're world doubles champion.
I've got to mention a couple of others quickly before we get into the details, but Bill Werbeniuk.
Oh, yes.
He used to fascinate me. Now, Bill, unfortunately, he had a health problem. He suffered from hypoglycemia, which actually meant, his body basically enabled him to drink lots and lots of beer without being affected.
Okay. Yes.
And he would often go on to an evening session having consumed about 8 pints, which calmed him down, but made him, unfortunately, put on rather a lot of weight. And then he got
Was he not on beta blockers to keep his heart rate?
Yes, he was. And then he got a tremor in his Q arm, so he had to drink even more beer to try and calm that down. Yeah. Cleverly, actually, he was able to get his lager put aside as a tax-deductible expense. He had quite a creative accountant, I think.
I have to say the Canadian tax authorities were very, very lenient.
And there's one great story where apparently he literally drank another player, Eddie Sinclair, under a snooker table by consuming 42 pints. So for various reasons, I found him quite a fascinating character.
Kirk Stevens was Canadian as well, wasn't he?
The man in the white suit.
The man in the white suit.
Yes, and there was Tony Knowles, and there was Cliff Thorburn, also Canadian.
No, don't skate over Tony Knowles, the ladies' man from Bolton.
The ladies' man from Bolton.
He was a good-looking boy. And he could play, but he was a good-looking boy. He didn't lack for company.
And Cliff Thorburn, the grinder.
Yeah.
But there was something enigmatic and fascinating about the way he went about grinding.
Yeah. And he had the first televised 147. And if you watch it, it's in the early rounds. You and I have both done the World Snooker once. We'll get to that in a second. But in the early rounds, you have two tables. So obviously there's a screen down the middle. And Bill Werbeneck is playing whoever he's playing. Bill Werbeneck's playing whoever he's playing. Cliff Thorburn playing who's playing. And Bill Werbeneck realizes that his friend, Canadian, is on a 147 and basically stops his match, doesn't he? And just walks around the corner so that he's watching Thorburn doing his 147. So when he completes it, Bill Werbeneck, against whom he's not playing, is pretty much the first person to hug him.
That's a good story. I hadn't realised that.
Yeah. That's what he does. He walks around the screen.
Bad news for everybody watching the Werbeneck match for 20 minutes. Where's he gone?
He's gone for a pint.
I know.
That's where he's gone. So 1981... Then why was he called the Nugget? Because you could rely on him.
I think that's Barry Hearn basically saying that I was pretty sure that my money would be wisely invested.
He spots him in a snooker club in East London. He's in Romford, in that area, Barry Hearn. He goes, right, I'm going to make this guy who he is. And in 1981, Steve Davis wins his first world title. And if you watch it, Barry Hearn admits, I'm sitting at the Crucible Theatre in Sheffield. He's about to win. I'm thinking, Barry Hearn, don't make a fool of myself. Have you seen this?
Yes.
Steve Davis wins. Barry Hearn basically tackles him so hard. It's like it's England v Scotland at Twickenham, isn't it? How he doesn't fall over, I don't know. And then you can't actually see Steve Davis because all you can see is Barry Hearn giving it the two fists to the crowd.
It's
as
horrendous.
If Barry Hearn's won.
It's horrendous.
It's really horrendous. Barry Hearn has a good grace to admit now it was horrendous.
Yeah,
it really was.
And Barry Hearn, let's be fair, was the man who fully took advantage of all that snooker started to offer in the 80s.
He took advantage of the fact it was on the telly all the time. So he wins the world title, Steve Davis, in 81, 83 and 84. And in the 84 semi-final, he beats Dennis Taylor, doesn't he? And Dennis Taylor is he's a good, hard-working, professional snooker player. He's never really hit the heights. He's 36 by the time of 1985, and he's lost his mum, to whom he's very, very close. He comes from Northern Ireland, although he's living in Lancashire, Dennis Taylor. And time's running out, isn't it, for Dennis Taylor?
Yes, essentially. At 36 years of age, many felt that his better days were behind him. And to be absolutely honest, he hadn't had that many great days. Look, he was a good player. Yeah. He'd won one big title prior to the 1985 championships. But you're right, he was sad. His mum, Annie, had died the previous September. He was very close to her. And actually, if you watch large segments of the final in 85, he's often chatting away. And he said afterwards, I was talking to my mum. He'd actually considered retiring the year before, Mark, because he'd picked up only £16,000 in prize money. And when you come to the final, as you say, he'd lost to Steve Davis in the semis the year before. He'd actually lost 8 of their 9 previous meetings. And when you look at the record that Davis was compiling, I think I'm right in saying that by the end of the 1980s, Steve Davis's record at the Crucible was 140 and lost 4. I mean, it's quite astonishing.
Well, he won 6 titles in the 80s and lost 2 finals. I mean, it's remarkable what he did. And you think, when we tell you the story of this, you think he should have won 7 titles, not 6. He is 8-0 up in the final. Yeah. He is 8-0 up. I mean, it's the loneliest place almost in sport, isn't it? When you're sitting in the chair, when you can't get out of it because your opponent is just metronomically potting and constructing huge breaks, and you just do not get an opportunity. Or if you get one opportunity and you don't take it, then your opponent just carries on, literally, you said it about Cliff Thorburn, grinding you into the dust.
Yeah, I mean, you are literally powerless to do anything about it. I don't think there's any other sport where you can't do a thing if your opponent's playing
you're right,
so
because
well.
even in tennis, even if you're playing really well, I have an opportunity to hit it back.
Of course.
I've got an opportunity to stop you scoring a goal. I've got an opportunity to hit you for a 4. But, in snooker, you do not have that opportunity.
He actually had a 50 break in the very first frame of the final, Dennis Taylor, and then basically sat down for the next 8. And he was panicking. He, by the way, Mark, wasn't the only person panicking. It's interesting briefly looking at how they got through to their respective finals, but also the overall picture of 85. It was an event that was full of one-sided matches, and the BBC were having to fill a lot because of that. Davis had beaten Neil Fold's 10-8, good match, but then he beats David Taylor 13-4. He beats Terry Griffiths. There's another great character.
Yes.
His hair was always perfect, had that wonderful Welsh accent. Davis won that one 13-6, and then he beat Ray Reardon 16-5 in the semis. So you get a gist there of how many one-sided matches there were. And Dennis Taylor had seen off Silvino Francisco 10-2. Our old mate Eddie Charlton was definitely chewing on wasps as he lost 13-6. Cliff Thorburn didn't grind as he lost 13-5.
His hair was still good, though.
His hair was still good. Tony Knowles didn't do much. He lost 16-5. Knowles, by the way, had beaten Jimmy White, who was another player that was coming through in this era, the whirlwind. And I mean, obviously, we've got to mention Alex Higgins, who, along with John Spencer, was my favourite, but such a flawed character. But they were having so many one-sided matches. And as you say, Mark, suddenly it's 8-0, almost 9-0. BBC executives are panicking big time.
Taylor, Davis misses a green for 9-0. If you look at it, and by his very, very high standards, he should have got it. He misses it for 9-0. Taylor clears the green to the pink for 8-1. Then it's 9-1. But then snooker's extraordinary how sometimes a session can take on its own momentum. From 9-1, the second session, it wasn't over the bank holiday weekend in those days, it was over the Saturday and Sunday. So the second session now is Saturday night. From 9-1, it goes to 9-7. Suddenly, Davis, who has been impregnable in the afternoon session, suddenly he can't hit a ball to save his life, and he's the one sitting down in the evening session.
It's incredible. Dennis Taylor did speak afterwards about how different sessions can be so different, and you can't get more of a contrast than that. As you say, he could have been 9-0 down. He goes to bed that night 9-7, says he slept pretty well. There's a good quote from Steve Davis who says, I slept like a baby. I kept waking up screaming all the time.
It just shows, isn't it, that level of pressure of the happens. So that's Saturday evening into Sunday then when it's going to be finished. 9-7 becomes 11-all. It becomes 13-11 to Davis. Now we're into the final session. It becomes 15-all. So you've clocked by now. At no stage has Dennis Taylor been in the lead. Not once so far has Dennis Taylor been in the lead. In fact, he's never in the lead until it matters, because 13-11 ahead of the final session becomes 15-all, becomes 17-15 to Davis. Yep. So Taylor now has to win the last 3 frames. He has no room for error. But as he said to himself, well, he'd won 6 frames the night before, from 9-1 to 9-7. So if I can win 6 in a row, I can win 3 in a row. And that's what I need to do.
Yeah. I mean, you have to commend his psychological thought process, his strength of character. And I get that because, listen, he'd faced humiliation, basically. Had he gone 9-0 down, the fact you've got yourself to 17-15, of course you want to become world champion, but at least, even if you now lose 18-15, you've made it one of the best finals of recent years. At 17-all, I mean, this is when...
Did you see, just for that, 17-16, did you see, he made it 17-16 with a pink to the middle pocket. That was a hell of a shot. The pressure was on there. So that 17-15 becomes 17-16.
Which then becomes 17-all. You've got to remember, I'm still wandering the streets of Barcelona trying to find a bar, so I never saw that pink.
No, I'm there. Yeah, no,
rely on you.
No one's going to bed.
Rely on you for that. I do know that at 17-all, he decides to nip out and have a quick brandy backstage with Trevor East, who's his best mate, and he'll become involved in the narrative a little bit later. He was the head of ITV Sport at the time. Dennis has a little brandy to steady the nerves, and goodness me, he would need that brandy over the next 68 minutes.
He's done it. Dennis Taylor, for the first time, becomes Embassy World Snooker Champion 1985.
The last frame takes 68 minutes. And Dennis, the one thing we haven't mentioned about Dennis Taylor, which you'll know, is his glasses. And he literally the sort of person, your mum would have said it and my mum would have said it, which is, why is that man wearing his glasses upside down? And they were he tried contact lenses, but he said they were a bit itchy. And when he went down on the shot, because obviously they weren't as sophisticated as they are now, they're still not that great, I wear contacts. But by having upside down glasses, it basically meant that he could keep the focus when he went down on the shot, that the focus, I suppose, in terms of the lengthening or whatever, did not change. But they were upside down glasses. The top half are double the size of the bottom half.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's unimaginable to see him winning the World Championship without those in hindsight.
That's a part of it.
It was quite extraordinary. And, this final frame, Mark, as you rightly say, 68 minutes long. There are 111 shots in it altogether. And I think it's fair to say that it was poor quality. I mean, there was some good safety play.
Brilliant safety play.
But understandably, aside from that, you've got two guys whose nerves are shot to pieces. Had they known at that point that 18.5 million people were by now tuning in to watch, I think we might have had 222 shots.
It's 62-44 to Davis with 4 colours left. So Taylor needs all 4. As you said, Dennis Taylor's muttering to his mum, and he goes, whenever I missed a shot, Steve Davis's crew, who were the Romford crew.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, he could hear them going, come on, my son.
He was getting pretty annoyed with them, wasn't he?
And every time he went, come on, my son, Dennis Taylor would go, right, I'm gonna show the Essex boys. As you say, brilliant safety shots. Taylor then puts this is a fantastic shot under pressure, a long brown into the corner, then a tricky blue along the cushion and the pink. That means 62-59 to Davis. And now, after whatever it is, 17 days, we are down to the black ball.
This was the longest ever final. By now, we're approaching the 15-hour mark. It eventually concludes after 14 hours and 50 minutes. And Mark, I've watched the concluding moments of that frame. I mean, it's extraordinary. Every time I watch it again, I'm still assuming that Steve Davis is going to win it. But actually, it's Taylor who has more chances to close it out before he eventually does.
He has 3 attempts at the black. One, a long black he says he should have got, which is to top right if you're looking at the telly. Davis really, realistically, only has 1 chance. And he says as he stood up, his legs had gone to jelly. He couldn't feel the cue. And it's into the bottom left pocket. If you can imagine, shut your eyes. It's looking at the to the bottom left pocket. And he's thinking to himself, don't undercut it. Most people, if you miss it, you're going to undercut it. Ted Lowe says he would have potted it 999 times out of 1,000. No, that was John Arnold, wasn't it? Anyway.
Little mixture of both.
He said, and Davis knew it was very, very potable, and he overcuts it. I love the fact. Did you read what Ronnie O'Sullivan? I don't know how old Ronnie O'Sullivan is. He's a kid watching the Snooker Club, and even though they're all, he goes, miss it, Ginge, miss it, Ginge, because he wanted Dennis Taylor to. As I think it's actually, to be fair, there was a very, very good BBC documentary on it, a couple of very good ones. Colin Murray did the next one. Gary Lineker's a big snooker fan. He said it was like Woods missing a 2-footer. Davis missing that.
I mean, there's a great quote from Davis after that shot that he missed, where he goes, that's how you bottle it, by hitting it thick. But actually, I think with the benefit of hindsight, both players have admitted that it was a tougher shot than it looked.
Yes, what Davis has missed.
That miss from Davis, but it sets up Dennis again, who has spoken about how with one of his earlier chances, he knew that his cue arm was flickering all over the place and he jumped up off the ball. And here's his chance. And I mean, television works so well with snooker, of course, because you can get right up close on the player's face. You can cut away to the crowd, all the rest of it. And I can still see the shot as he's leaning over the table.
It takes good time, doesn't it?
It takes a long time. You've got the corner pocket right at the forefront of the camera. And what follows thereafter is legendary.
When he, I mean, obviously, Rambling Roger's still talking you through it. As he pots it, of course, because this is what I always used to do playing pool, I'm thinking, I hope the cue ball doesn't go in, but of course he's got brilliant control over it. So he pots it, place goes mad, he puts the cue horizontally above his head.
Yep.
And it's sort of quite unsnooker-like, it's not wild, but he's so thrilled. And then he starts wagging his finger at Trevor East as if to say, I told you I'd do it.
Exactly. I mean, in fact, great snooker celebrations or not such great snooker celebrations. I mean, Dennis is deserved. And the Barry Herman earlier was just awful, but they do things in a different way.
Yeah, they do.
But by this point, it's 12:30 at night. We've got 18.5 million people watching. Apparently, Steve Davis tells the story that the national grid almost went down at 17 frames all because everybody went to get a a cup of tea. Dennis Taylor says that there were no emergency calls to Northern Ireland in the last 2 hours of the final because literally everybody was captivated.
And this is the mid-'80s, so there's a lot going on politically in Northern Ireland. Don't think that's unusual, very unusual to have no emergency calls. So Dennis Taylor does go and kiss the trophy because he can do now because he's won. And then we have the situation where David Vine interviews both players, and David Vine does what we were taught not to do on the first day of journalism question, which is ask Steve Davis a closed-off question. Yes. He says, "Can you believe what happened here tonight?" No. I mean,
fair enough. What do you want me to say?
He then does say, it happened in black and white, which is a great line. I give Steve Davis a lot of credit for that.
It's a great line, but he was criticised, Mark, afterwards for being perceived to be a bad loser.
I mean, in fact, it's not easy. You've got to stand there and, talk about how that happened. Barry Hearn immediately signs Dennis Taylor on a 5-year deal to join his Matchroom team along with Steve Davis and Tony Mio. And there's a massive victory parade for Dennis Taylor back in Northern Ireland, as you can imagine. 10,000 people come to celebrate with him. And then, of course, Steve Davis's one-word answers to David Vine inspires his spitting image puppet nickname. Interesting. He goes in there, I don't have a nickname. No one knows what I'm about. Davis gets to the final again the next year. Oh, the curse of the Crucible. What happens to Dennis Taylor the next year as defending champion? Loses in the first round. Loses to Mike Hallett in the first round. I think Davis had lost in the first round in 82 as well as defending champion, I think. Davis gets to the final next year and loses to the genial Yorkshireman Joe Johnson.
Yeah. I mean, that was astonishing.
That was as big a... No, was that a bigger shot than Taylor?
I think it possibly was.
Yeah.
So we look back at the 80s and Steve Davis has been champion 81, 83, 84, 87, 88 and 89. So he bounces back really well after losing to Taylor and Johnson. Some interesting quotes from him more recently. He's admitted to being hugely depressed in the months after that final in 85. He says, "I was constantly dwelling on the misses. I remember having a bath and I started reminiscing about the shots. Before I knew it, the bathwater had gone cold." He went on to say, "At some stage in my life, I should be allowed to forget that I missed that black." But he also is quoted as saying, I think the best moment of my career was missing the black against Dennis Taylor. So I wonder now, I'd love to ask this of Dave definitively, of Steve Davis definitively. The fact that you went on to become a world champion 6 times, was it a good thing that you actually lost in a final in that manner?
Yeah, I think that's fair enough because he says he's had so much fun with Dennis Taylor since then and he wouldn't change the results. So on the 40th anniversary, they played the frame again. They're always talking about it. I would struggle to tell you who he beat in those finals. I really genuinely would struggle to tell. I mean, I think you mentioned Terry Griffiths. I think he beat Jimmy White in one of them. Yeah. But we all know what happened in 1985. 6 world titles in 9 years, 6 UK titles, 3 Masters titles. He totally dominated the 1980s. But I think it's the yin and yang of sport, isn't it? You need to, you talked about rambling rods. My dad used to say to me, win with good grace and lose with dignity.
Yeah.
And I think he did lose with dignity. He really did. 1992, I just started my career. I was a local radio in Essex. And we got to the summer. Cricket was great. But I said to my boss, why don't I also on a Saturday afternoon interview some Essex sporting personalities? There were loads of them. No, good idea. So I had an hour with Trevor Brooking, charming, absolutely charming, and an hour with Steve Davis, and he was brilliant about his career. It's only 3 years after he's been world champion, about his career, about his music, because he's now I'm literally looking at the words. He's a progressive rock club DJ, whatever that means. But he loves his music and so forth. He was absolutely brilliant about it all. And as you do, I remember getting in the car at Chelmsford with my girlfriend and saying, "I've just interviewed Steve Davis." And I had a little cassette. I put it in the cassette machine of my purple Ford Fiesta and said, "Would you like to listen to my hour with Steve
Oh, my
Davis?"
goodness me. That was the end of that relationship.
Anyway, she said, "Of course I would. There's nothing I'd like more." So we got in the car in Chelmsford and she woke up in Bayswater. And we've been married.
Your interviewing technique has not improved in the intervening 30 years.
And we've been married 30 years.
Oh,
yeah, you didn't expect that, did you?
Ruined it all. Goodness me.
But we
patience of a saint Victoria's got.
We've both done the Crucible.
Yes.
So very, very, actually, before we do the Crucible, the other thing about snooker, in a serious point, is if you live on your own, snooker is brilliant. And I had a great aunt, my grandfather's aunt, called Fanny Pougatch. That was her name. And she was my dad's aunt. And so, my sisters and I took her out for lunch one day towards the end of her life. And I was really curious because that's what we do. And I went, Auntie Fanny, do you have any other names? You're Fanny Pougatch. I said, I'm Mark Charles Adam. And Katrina and Ali, my sisters, is what the names are. And she looked at me in all seriousness and she went, no, I'm just plain old Fanny. And with that, the next thing I heard was this banging under the table, which was the heads of my two sisters apparently looking for their napkins, but they were laughing so hard that they were bashing the underneath of the table. While I was looking at Auntie Fanny in the eyes going, well, that's very interesting, Auntie Fanny.
I'm so glad we've moved on from the 85 final to Auntie Fanny because she's a key component. Can I quickly say before we refer to
she loves snooker. Yeah. She loved snooker because she did have a black and white television for quite a long time. But it was company for her.
I think there are lots of people who, for 50 weeks of the year don't have a great deal of interest in snooker to this day. Yeah. But as soon as the Crucible comes around, they will watch every frame.
It's like Wimbledon,
It's the same with Wimbledon, and good luck to them all. Yeah. Just in terms of the way that Dennis Taylor celebrated, we've heard that Steve Davis is having baths and then watching the water turn cold while he reflects on all that happened in the final frame. Apparently, Dennis Taylor partied for about 18 months.
Quite right, too. I like that.
He says a couple of weeks after the final, he was in Northern Ireland for an exhibition event. He met a fellow with a baby, had a baby in his arms in a nappy. And the fellow said, have a look at this, Dennis, and turns to the baby and says, what does Dennis Taylor do? And the baby immediately raises its hands in the air. All that's missing is the snooker cue. He says he met another bloke in Blackburn who admitted that he'd had a heart attack at the moment that he potted the winning black.
Oh, yeah.
But fortunately was on the road to recovery.
He was living in Blackburn at the time, Dennis.
So it may have been somebody connected to him, but obviously was taking that final a little too seriously. Another bloke who leapt up so high that he shattered a glass shelf, injuring himself and saying to Dennis, you owe me a new glass shelf. He says, to this day, people wag their finger at me, turn their glasses upside down, but I never get fed up with it.
No, of course. I love that 18 months thing rather than, I'm a pro or start the next day. Let's finish with the Crucible. We both did it once. What are your memories of working at the Crucible?
Well, quite an alarming memory in many ways. 1993, I've mentioned this actually in the previous episode when we were talking about the marathon because I'd just run the marathon, came back up. It was an amazing couple of weeks. But my producer back in London, Jo Watson, said to me, I was still quite young, quite inexperienced. She said, you're going to have a great time. They're a really good bunch. Just be careful around Jimmy White. He can be a little bit touchy if you get on the wrong side of him. I said, oh, thank you, Joe. That's very, very good advice. Anyway, the middle weekend on the Friday night, we went out as journalists stroke broadcasters occasionally do.
We used to.
Well, we used to, yes. We used to. I'd made good friends with I can't to this day remember his name, but he was from Israel. We really just bonded, had a great night. But being professional, I thought I've got to get in for the first frame Saturday morning. Play started at 10:30. Jimmy White was playing. So I got in early, had a cup of coffee. It's still the same when you pull back the black curtains, you walk down these steps and the press row was right at the front. And I sit down with my Israeli friend next to me, feeling very virtuous that I've made it for the opening frame. Jimmy White up against, I can't remember who it was. Anyway, true story. The next thing I know, something is being rammed into my chest. I've fallen asleep. I wake up and Jimmy White is looming over me and he's got his cue and he's banging me in the chest saying, I'm sorry my game's so boring, mate. Sent you to sleep, have I?
Please tell me you were snoring as well.
I have no recollection of falling asleep. And I'm mortified. The words of Jo Watson, just don't fall out with Jimmy White. So anyway, at the end of that frame, I said to my Israeli friend, right, I've got to go get another cup of coffee. That was a bit awkward. And I stand up and I walk up the stairs and I'm aware that somebody's walking up behind me and I think it's my Israeli colleague. And I thought, right, well, I'm going to embarrass him now. So I went through the curtain and I pulled it shut and I kept it closed. And sure enough, a figure is trying to prise open this black curtain. And eventually it's pulled open. Jimmy White is standing there. He's trying to go to the loo mid-interval, as it were, or during the thing. And he just looked at me. I won't say what he said. But
it wasn't saying, come out for a drink with me.
you can guess.
Yeah.
And funnily enough, I have to say that over the next 2 or 3 years, I got to know Jimmy quite well, and he was such a lovely guy, and he forgave me. But that was a horrendous experience. I hope your memory is rather better.
Well, maybe he knew, because I was the next year I was doing the role that you did, and I must have gone up to him and said, I won't behave like Marcus Buckland. No, I said I'm from the BBC, and he went, right, don't behave like that fool from last year. Anyway, he went, Matt, you'll really enjoy it, whatever. And I said, really looking forward to it, Jimmy, thank you. I came back that night into the hotel. I turned round to go to the lift, and Jimmy White is asleep on the sofa in the hotel lobby. Literally.
Wow.
And as I walk past, I wake up and he goes, I told you the snooker was great. But yes, Mr. White, it's brilliant. That's one memory. The other is it was the last appearance of Alex Higgins at this championship, and he gets beaten. And I'm sure it was the same with your year. It changes every year. But basically in the press conference, there were probably, 10, 15 people there. And being the radio reporters, we're sitting at the front, aren't we? Because we're going to do the interview. And he literally says, and we're all sitting down there waiting, and he goes, you, pointing at me, read this out. And I'm like, what's that? He goes, read this letter out to everybody. And I'm your age, as you said, 24, 25. I'm thinking, what? And I didn't really know what to do. So I went, okay there. And it's a fan letter from, Joe Blow in Swansea. Dear Alex, it's amazing to have you back at the World Championship. It's not been the same without you. Snooker's the poorer for you. And I am going the same colour as an Arsenal shirt. I'm going so red thinking, and I'm sweating and I'm thinking, please let this be over. And, I think I skip to the end and go, and it finishes, love Joan and Phil or whatever. And then Alex is going, yeah, you see, that's why they need me in snooker and all this. And I sort of scuttle back to my chair and sit down and, put my hands in my ears and go,
so your career has included PR man for Alex Hurricane Higgins.
Yeah. But it's the thing is, as we finish now, it's still massive world snooker. But if we go back to where we were, 4 channels, it will never have the impact today, clearly, because you're not going to get 18.5 million people. If you have an amazing finish, it might do, but you're not going to have the impact. You're not going to have the finish. You're not going to have the longevity that would have had.
No.
Yeah.
But it's amazing. We are more than 40 years on from that event, and everybody remembers it so clearly. And of course, Steve and Dennis go on various tours, and Davis has said one day we'll do a care home tour. I mean, it's going to last for as long as they're around. It was one of the great sporting moments.
And kids, remember, you've all got mobiles now, but if you're ever in Marcus's position, reverse the charges. That's what you do. Reverse the charges. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed that as much as we did, reliving the 1985 World Snooker Final. If you're watching us on YouTube, please do give us a like and subscribe, and you can listen to us wherever you get your podcasts.